Welcome to the ACT podcast. Teaching unions play a significant role in the professional lives of educators, teachers and support staff in the UK. They provide essential protection and advocacy, but as they increasingly take public positions on a range of social and political issues, some Christians are thinking a little tentatively about how to engage faithfully and wisely, and some indeed are opting out altogether. Today, we're joined by a Christian teacher who also serves as a union rep. We're going to explore what he thinks about what it means to balance our Christian convictions with the responsibility to support colleagues and help to uphold their rights. So, John, hello.
Hello.
First of all, say at this point, your name actually isn't John.
Yeah.
For understandable reasons. You want to be a little bit more discreet about this.
Yes, and I'm sure you can tell this isn't my actual voice either.
Can you give us a little bit of an insight into what led you to take on the role as a union rep? And what does it actually involve?
Okay, maybe if I start with my involvement from the beginning when I trained to be a teacher. You were offered free union membership, and I actually took out a couple of memberships, and at the time I opted. Then, when I had to start paying for subscriptions, I opted for the union that had sent me the fewest mailings and the nicest free gifts. I stayed with them for a while. Then there were changes over the years. Unions have merged and so on. I've had a couple of changes, and I'm in the union, now, for a few years. But becoming rep, it was almost by default, I think, when I joined and transferred into this union. Almost immediately I got letters about, would you like to be the rep? Because I think unions are very keen to have workplace reps, and I don't think people always wanting to step forward. They want to be part of a union, but they don't want to take on that role. I ended up as rep by default because I ignored the letters. They assumed that I was accepting the UL. Since then we've done things properly, and I've been elected as the rep. I stood as the rep and was elected. I've done the workplace rep training as well now. I kind of fell into the role, partly because a few years ago there was some strike action over teacher pay. People in the union, in the school, were wanting some advice, and somebody needed to look into where we stood and to advise on what the different options were and the legalities of that, and to stand up for those things. I kind of fell into the role almost accidentally as rep.
So it was something you weren't necessarily committed to the trade union movement for many years. It's something you just thought, actually, yeah, there's an opportunity, I should probably take it. Is that an accurate reading?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'd always have described it. In fact, I think I probably still would. I'm not a union person, really. I don't think I'm particularly militant over these types of issues. I don't particularly have strong feelings, let's do something about this. But I do think it's important, and as I've come to understand the role a little bit more, I think I've perhaps had a slightly better understanding of what this role is and what it means. I've kind of fallen into it, but I'm quite comfortable in this role at the moment.
Just before we dive into some of those more contentious topics, we must remember that all of us who are in education or have been in education have been beneficiaries of the work that education unions have done in improving pay and conditions. I believe that the pay scales, that sort of methodology for awarding teachers particular salaries, was secured by the National Union of Teachers when it was in existence. We can be thankful that unions have helped to secure. I'm not trying to say it is necessarily fair in everyone's opinions now, but there certainly is a level of gratitude.
In our training on the reps team was the histories. What have unions done for us? When you look back, they have been a force for good in the profession, other professions as well. There are some areas where I don't always see eye to eye with them, but on the whole, they have done a lot for securing the rights of workers and people who were mistreated or unfairly remunerated and so on. So I think the trade unions have been a power for good. But like any movement, like any organisation, there will be pros and cons and aspects of things that we don't like and things that we do like.
And I think that probably leads us nicely into the question I'm going to ask now. So at ACT, we get emails regularly from teachers that are saying, Do you operate as a trade union? Because I can't, in good conscience, remain a member of my teaching union anymore because of their stance on X, Y, and Z. So, did you have any hesitations either renewing membership or being a rep?
Yes, I have that. I mean, you see the mailings that come round. As a member, we are asked to vote on the issues that will be discussed at your conference. Now, I've never been to an annual conference. That may change. I may look to go. I'm also in a union. I think that doesn't put quite so much emphasis on those issues. That's part of the reason I chose the particular union I'm in. But it is a really difficult question. Do you stay signed up or do you not now? There are other options there. There is, I can't remember the name of it, but there is another thing that represents teachers from a legal point of view, but doesn't campaign and doesn't take a view on those. If you just want those legal protections, then there is another option for you.
I believe that is called EDAPT or ADAPT. And I would definitely say that's not a bad option for those people for whom their conscience is burdened by this. I'd love to hear more about perhaps how you've navigated that.
And now I consider joining them myself either. But I decided not to because I thought there are occasions when actually I do think we need a campaigning voice. Rarely, but I think we do. How I've navigated those issues, I've been reflecting on this up to this podcast and coming on here. If I'm honest, my stance in the past has been not to get involved with any of it, to ignore it. I've not voted on the issues to be discussed at conference. I've never taken an interest in that level of things, but now I'm in this role as rare. I don't know whether my thinking is shifting a little bit, and I think I would liken this a little bit too. Being part of a church or a denomination that perhaps has views and stances that you don't agree with now, that may be a more liberalising agenda. Or it may just be differences over baptism, but what do? Do you leave in the hope that you're going to find something that fits your views perfectly, which you're never going to do? Do you wear those things and focus on the bits that you want? Do you try and change it? Maybe I should be voting on some of these issues and promoting the issues that I think the union should be focusing on to do with teaching and conditions and not some of those wider political issues. Should I try and influence them in some way through my votes? Yeah. So I think there's a variety of things. It was interesting. I want to be very careful what I say, so I don't identify which union I recently had the opportunity or was invited to go to, a meeting where they'd invited in a person to speak who was part of the LGBT community. They were senior member of staff in their school and they were going to be talking to us about some of the difficulties and things that they had faced and some of the phobias that they had seen in schools. When I first heard about it, my reaction was, I don't want to go. I'm not interested. I know I almost certainly won't agree with what they're saying. I didn't want to go. And then, as I considered it, I thought, as a Christian, whether or not I agree with everything they say, I felt that I ought to go and listen, and to hear what was being said, because, okay, I wouldn't support promotion of those types of ideologies and things through PSHE. I think there are some genuine concerns there that, as Christians, we have, but we also need to listen because people that are part of those communities have faced genuine discrimination, and there have been times that have been very difficult for them unjustly. So these Christians, we need to stand up for those people as well. We need to love those people as well in the things that go on in the workplace, as well as just kind of on a spiritual kind of level, if you like. And actually, at times, standing up for employment rights is potentially be the right thing to do. There are some difficult areas there. I'm not denying that. I think maybe we ought to be listening a little bit more before we jump in. I thought about it, and I thought, my initial reaction was wrong. Maybe I should hear now as it happened, because I'd been out of school for several days for some CPD events. Around that time, I wasn't actually able to go, because it wasn't fair to ask the school to release me again for another day. But I changed my view. I'd gone from, no, I don't want to go to, actually, no, I do want to go in here, I do want to go and listen. And then make an informed decision about what's being said here, rather than just outright dismissing it before I'd even heard what was being said. So, yeah, I think some of those issues, there's that balance of wanting to support individuals who have a right to earn a living, who have a right to work, who shouldn't face undue discrimination, but also thinking, how do we protect children? How do we look after the interest of the children in this? And they're almost two issues. They overlap significantly in a school. But how do we navigate? That's a tricky one. And I think for me personally, listening will be a first step to actually what's being said.
So I think that's really helpful, John. And I think it's much easier to understand that from that adult perspective, where you are thinking about your colleagues as individuals made in the image of God, all who need support and protection, and all who are doing a demanding job. I think, as you've alluded to already, sometimes unions do wield that very progressive influence over schools themselves, over teacher training, and some of these issues that perhaps as adults we can discuss and we can approach with a level of pragmatism. When these things, as you said, seep down into schools, or when they have an impact on perhaps other colleagues. I mean, I'll give you a few examples. I'm not, the NEU is probably my prime example because they do seem to be the most aggressively progressive. They certainly have gone overboard in passing motions about all kinds of issues, supporting abortion rights, condemning the US Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, protesting against the Supreme Court's ruling that woman means biological woman and it refers to biological sex in the Equality Act. So those things, I think, really do elevate the level of concern that many of our members and many Christians would have. So how would you say then, because I have to admit, I was a member of a teaching union all my career, and I similarly sat back, enjoyed the fact that I had this knowledge that I would be protected if I ever had an issue, but I didn't engage with some of the things that were going on that were influencing union culture. Very recently, in the last few years, since I've been working with ACT, I spoke about this progressive angle they take on most things and said, are you aware of Christian concerns about your members who are Christians and their concerns perhaps about some of these stances? And they said, well, we don't really hear much from Christians about these. And that really challenged me. So, yeah, I just wonder whether that's the risk of staying or being involved in a union just for the protection, but not engaging with what it stands for on a myriad of different topics are real. But then, are there risks of stepping away altogether? What would you say about that?
This is a really complex thing, and what we should do about it, and perhaps what I'd hope for the future, it's not easy at all. Ideal world unions, I think, would stay in their lane a little bit more. Why is a UK education union trying to veto decisions made by democratically elected leaders in America? What is going on there? Even some of the issues that we see, you mentioned like abortion rights and things. As a Christian, I have a particular view on that. There is some degree in which it affects what happens at school, because there will always be pupils at school who are having sexual relationships. Some of them will find themselves pregnant. We've got issues there. But in terms of what the union should be campaigning on, I would very much like them to just focus on the things that I think they were set up to do. I think schools and teachers are in a very tricky position. I think part of the reason that unions are perhaps able to have as much sway as they can on this is because the guidance from government is just not very good. At the moment, we've waited months and months and months. Well, the previous government, Conservative government, put out the draft guidance. We had the general election, a change of government. Went on the back burner for months. The new guidance has come out. They're consulting on currently. There are some good things in that. But I think it's leaving far too much in the hands of schools to deal with. I've been through that guidance and I don't want to break confidence here, so I need to be careful what I say. But basically, it's saying schools should make a decision about whether children are allowed to transition. If you've got complex needs there with children with autism are massively overrepresented amongst children experiencing some sort of gender confusion or gender dysphoria. Often they have other needs as well. There may be complicated home lives. How on earth can a head teacher or a teacher make a clinical decision? The CAS review has made it clear that these are clinical decisions, that these are not neutral acts. allowing somebody to be known by a different name or use different pronouns. They have a psychological impact on the child. Now, how on earth can a head teacher or anyone working in school possibly make those sorts of decisions? Because the guidance is not there. It allows unions and other pressure groups to put, and because a school, a head teacher faced with a situation like that, who are they going to turn to? Are they going to turn to the organisations that they see as reputable? They're going to turn to the likes of Stonewall and other things for guidance, and they go and possibly to the unions, and they're going to get this pressure. So I think, one, we need more evidence and better evidence. We need the government, I think, to take a stronger line on some of those, because it's passing the buck and it's leaving schools vulnerable and schools with the best will in the world. I'm not criticising schools because they will want to do the best for the children. And often, teachers and head teachers are not particularly well informed about these issues. I've done quite a bit of reading. I'm by no means an expert. It's an issue that affects my family. I've done a lot of reading about this. I followed it for years. I'm reasonably well informed as a layperson. Most schools are not. They will turn to who they view are the experts and be led by them. And the people who suffer at the end of the day will be the children.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard. My concern, though, is we see increasingly Christians in schools who have spoken up about these issues and then have suffered detriment.
Yeah.
My concern is if a Christian teacher speaks up, something happens at school, they're suspended, whatever, where would the unions fall? Would the union support them?
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say the unions don't hear from Christians. Maybe we do need to speak up more, but maybe the unions need to seek out our voices as well, because I'm not sure I would feel comfortable in expressing some of the ideas I have, even though I could point to reasonable evidence to back up my views, irrespective of my religious or theological views on them. I think there is a growing body of evidence about these issues that should give us very serious pause for thought.
I think that's really, it kind of hits the nail on the head when you said, they say they don't hear from us, but do we feel that the environment is welcoming a Christian perspective? Because obviously the Christian perspective isn't solely around gender and gender dysphoria. There are a whole range of views that Christians may have on a load of different topics, and we don't have time to go into them all. But do you think that there is space for a diversity of views amongst union members? And I suppose it depends at what level. Many teachers will just have a membership and they don't even read the magazine that comes through the post, but then you'll get some that have more influence and sway over the general direction, are more tunnel visioned when it comes to what they will permit to be acceptable.
I hope there is space for diversity to view where we can talk with some evidence behind us about these issues. Take abortion as another example. We could talk about the evidence there is that people who have that procedure, who have an abortion, actually suffer distress and things after it. It's not just you've had the abortion, we move on. Actually, some women suffer for many years with the burden of what's happened there. And so if we want to talk sense about these things, then there ought to be space to discuss those as well. It's not an open and shut case that some advocates and some campaigners want it to be. I think there is space there. So I think, yes, we need to be equipped. We need to know the arguments. We need to be able to speak up. Certainly on the reps training that I did, quite a lot of time was spent talking about the protected characteristics. Not just the unions defending those in the workplace, but actually within the union itself being a safe space. Now, obviously, religious and philosophical views are a protected characteristic. The difficulty with all of these things is where one protected characteristic comes into contact with another. Where does that happen? I hope that there would be a space that as Christians we can speak out more. I think in all sorts of areas we ought to be more confident in speaking out. And there are people there to support if things get wrong. I asked the question earlier, would a union necessarily support you? But there are other organisations. Christian Concern often takes on many of these cases. Is that because the unions won't? I don't know. But there ought to be space there. I think the unions, if what you are saying is representative, and actually the unions want to hear those voices, then I think we should have more. If they're saying that we are not hearing Christian voice, then if they're welcome to hear them, then yes. But perhaps we ought to speak out with more confidence than we do. Maybe we shouldn't let fear hold us back.
For those Christians who are still union members, who are members of whichever union, this is a matter for their own conscience. And it's funny because I often get people talking to me about different ideologies or different Christian ideas about education, whether home education is always the right choice, or state education, or independent schools, or small Christian schools, or some other choice. And I always think, gosh, I don't think there's one option that is the best. There might be an option that is right for your family, there might be an option that's right for you. But actually, through all of these options, in most circumstances, we can glorify God if we feel that we are doing our very best to protect children, to influence the context for the glory of God. That doesn't mean that you offer up your own children as sacrifices if you really believe that they're going to be damaged by being in some kind of state education that's particularly damaging. But I think it's very similar to the question of unions. I think it is plausible and possible for someone like you to be involved in a union and to influence from within, because there is so much good that you can do. I also think it's possible that someone says, in good conscience, I can't pay my subscription to this organization that I know is campaigning on issues that are particularly unbiblical. I think as Christian educators, we've got to give grace to one another.
It reminds me of the dispute that arose between Martin Lloyd-Jones. Should Christians leave the Anglican Church or not? And they had that big, and it's exactly that. You've got to think about where God has placed you, the circumstances that you are in. And often they're not always within our control. They're not. Homeschooling, Christian schooling, many families, even if they wanted to do that, they might not be able to financially, there may not be a school anywhere near them. And actually, I think it is very much of, okay, this is perhaps what we want, ideally, but I'm here. This is where God has led us at the moment. This is where God has put us, wherever we are. This is now my mission field. This is now the part of the world that I have to try and influence and win for Christ in whatever way that is. And I think we should, and I'm speaking as much to myself as anybody else here, but I think we should try and be more outspoken and more robust in and have that confidence. The examples we have of the disciples in the Bible being commanded not to teach anymore, and how we can't but speak. We were sent out with the Great Commission. All authority has been given to me, therefore go. Yes, that may put people in tricky situations at times, and people need support in that. We should be doing all we can to win this culture and to win these things for Christ, because that's what we command is to do. I don't think the Great Commission is limited to just evangelism and winning converts. I think it is about all authority has been given to me. That's everything. Kuyper, who said, there's not one square inch where Christ says this. It doesn't say this is mine. We need to claim that as well.
I think that's a really good point. We've actually a while ago, wrote an article about wisdom for engaging. And I hate the word intentional because I think it's overused, but I do think when it comes to union membership, not being passive, being intentional, you are part of it and you get stuck in like you do. Whether it's actually I've decided I'm going to make a stand, I can't stay. Well, don't just slip away and not renew your membership to the leadership and explain graciously why you can't, you don't feel adequately represented. It'd also be great to close on some of the opportunities you have to be salt and light. So when it comes to being a union rep, we've talked a lot about the culture warsy stuff and navigating issues with a clear conscience. But what does it actually mean to be a rep? How can you support your colleagues, show them care, and be salt and light in that place?
I think it's about being that listening ear to the concerns that they have when issues arise and then finding ways of how you can address that. I'm very fortunate in that the school that I'm in, we have a very positive relationship with the senior leaders in the school. They are very open and responsive to issues whenever we raise, whether that's officially through union channels, whether that's just informally, but being that person that somebody can come to and go, look, I'm not sure about this, or where do I stand on this issue? And either being able to answer the question or point them in the right direction, or I know someone who can answer. Being their voice and an advocate for them to the leadership. I think that's really important, that people are seen and heard. It is about valuing people who are made in the image of God. And that, there we will have differences with different people. We are called to open our arms wide and to support the people around us, to be a good neighbour. Part of that is helping to represent them and helping to make their situation better whenever we can do that. Finding ways that work for both the school, the workplace, and the employees and the individuals there. Happier that workplace can be, the more content people feel, the more likely people are to stay at the school. You reduce your staff turnover. There's so many positives that can come from it, from both sides. So it's not about being argumentative and militant angry. What can we do? How can we bring people together here? How can we hear what's being said on both sides and find that middle ground, I think, is the key thing for me.
Absolutely. That's a great place to end. We will be praying for you as you seek to serve your colleagues, and as you also seek to be salt and light within the union. Thank you for all you are doing, and thank you so much for your time, Dan.
Thank you very much.